And sponsors for this event this morning are the North Texas Community Foundation, Southside Bank, Fidelity Investments, the Real Estate Council of Greater Fort Worth, and United Way of Tarrant County. So thank you to all of our sponsors.
Thank you, Chris. I'm Jackie Lambiers. I'm a professor in the Department of Strategic Communication at the Bob Schieffer College of Communication here at TCU, and I'm one of the co-hosts of the event. I want to introduce my co-host. My co-host maybe should be Ashley English. She's one of the researchers that I've been working with. The other is Dr. Julie O'Neill, who is here with us this morning. And Ashley has COVID. And so we also know that a couple of our table listeners who are going to listen for us have COVID. So if your table doesn't have a listener, come and find me as we're getting started, and I'll find somebody to fill in for you. We really appreciate all of these listeners in the room. They all came to training on Tuesday, and we're trying to model something for the community that we think would work really well, which is using trained listeners and listening to community members, centering other people's voices, and giving partnerships and power to people who maybe haven't been able to be inside the power circle. We have a lot of Fort Worth Report staffers around the room who are also listening so that they can follow up. That's one of our sort of things to do. The takeaway that we're going to do is to help with that reporting. Ashley, Julie, and I will use some of your great ideas as we continue to do research to help with community groups that are trying to listen better. So all of what we're doing today will go forward and help us a lot. We started this with how might we make Fort Worth better? And we wanted to host an agenda-free listening session to show that, to see the possibilities of a different format. So if we're focused on listening this morning, that means I'm not going to talk much more, except to share 10 sentences about the framework today. And some of these are run-on sentences, I will cop to that. But here are those 10 sentences, and then we'll let you do the talking. Since we're partnering with the Fort Worth Report, we'll use sort of a journalistic 5 W's and 1 H approach to my list of 10. I don't have all of them in here, but I'll start with why. We are here because of Tatiana Jefferson, since her spirit and tragic loss catalyzed a round of research about organizational listening with my colleagues, Dr. English and Dr. O'Neill. Her tragic death caused us to ask ourselves whether we were doing enough as academics and as community members to bring attention to listening in our own community and through our own local organizations and government. So today we're here because of Tatiana Jefferson at a fitting time for Fort Worth and just before the Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, and it gives us a chance to think broadly about those who have been excluded from being listened to. What we're doing is called agenda-free listening, and we hope that you can both look at this session and through it. At it and through it. What are we doing here? Being more aware of those types of things so that we can be better and more responsive to the needs of everybody in Fort Worth and Tarrant County. Another why is that we need each other. And we need to find ways to foster dialogue and listening after some divisiveness and a pandemic that has separated us from one another. How might we listen better, share information respectfully, and find common ground again? And so we're here together to talk about how we might listen better, first of all, and then how we might especially listen to people outside the power circle around topics that are vital to our community's well-being. Wouldn't it be great if we could solve all of our community's problems in an hour? But we know that we're simply continuing long-term conversations that need action and also starting some new conversations too. And so today, we are not looking for agreement or consensus. We're instead wanting to take stock of the many different ideas that can catalyze community-based solutions and build a foundation for future listening and discussions in loving and civil forums like this one. So, enjoy generating ideas about listening at your own table, and we'll wrap things up in about 40 minutes. With me is Esdras Tucker. I'm not sure where he ended up, but we're so glad for him to join me after the session. He is the president and CEO and co-founder of DEI Consultants here in Fort Worth, and I have the pleasure of knowing him in a lot of different ways and serving on a board with him. but he's gonna fill in for Ashley when we try to do a quick summary. So get started, and we'll give you a few prompts along the way. Thank you for being here.
One of the things that we want to talk about, especially as it comes to listening in general, is who gets listened to, who listens well, where does the listening take place.
Here, one of our backups for listening. Please come up front. I'll assign you to a table.
Where should it take place? How do we get better listening outside the classroom? So think about that from that perspective as we jump into this topic. Megan?
People who do like the funding, for example, like you have some shelters that would usually want a little bit different than those that are publicly funded. The ones that are privately owned have more restrictions versus the ones that are publicly funded don't have very many. So as it is, families go in and never really get the education that they need to sustain themselves after they leave, versus ones that are privately owned that are a little more rigid, are prepared.
Douglas and I actually work for Workforce Solutions for Tarrant County, so we handle the employment side of things. And so if you're looking for workers, we work with employers, and then job seekers we work with to get them employed. So the Texas Workforce Commission is the unemployment side of things, and we are the employment side of things.
I was very much into pop-ups when pop-ups, people didn't even know what they were. So I've been through pop-ups and now brick and mortar for other people. But yeah, I grew up in a small town with a family with a small business.
Nice.
And that's what I knew, you know. And so, no, this is great.
Okay, so the first section that we're talking about is listening. Who gets listened to? I don't know if you'd rather me read all the questions so you can kind of start thinking about your answers, or but essentially I'm trying to capture who gets listened to, who listens well, like meaning in our community, where does listening take place, where should it take place, and how do we get better at listening to those outside the power circle.
Okay.
I think some of these questions maybe I was like, where does listening take place? Because, for me, if I do have questions, I guess the first thing I look towards is counsel. I was like, all right, that should be my first point of contact, city council member. Have I reached out to them? No, but at the same time, I'm like, how accessible are they? What capacity, what are they able to accomplish? Does my voice stop there, or do they guide me to where my voice should be heard? And maybe that could be a good point of resource for me as constituent in my area, or especially for my community.
From what I understand, TCU's enrollment is somewhere around 11 or 12,000.
I think so, yes.
Georgia's 80,000.
Also, TCU's private, I think Georgia's
We're
public.
private. Yeah.
The difficult part is all social media is turned into inserts, right? There's no depth, there's no detail. You get a one sentence or an informal half a sentence to make a point. There's no detail that actually gets across. So that's the bad part of social media, is that if we're here talking in a conversation, we're not going to talk in half sentence conversation, right? There's going to be detail. There's support for whatever it is we put out there. It's not happening on social media. And so you take that one sentence, the headline, and that's all you heard, and you walk away with that.
I think the invitation needs to be put out to groups that haven't been listened to. Like, recognize the people in the group that hasn't been listened to, and invite them. Like this. I mean, to a really accessible, comfortable place to be listened to. And that's easier said than done, but I mean, really to look and see who doesn't have a voice, and then invite them to speak. I mean, in an accessible manner, which, I mean, 7:30 in the morning at TCU might not be, I mean, it is a great place for us today, but might, you know, that might not work for everyone, but we'll figure that out.
How do we invite people who are not like us, who are not in our social circle, to come to a place like this? How do we find them? Where do we find them? How do we get them to participate?
Well, I think Fort Worth report probably did a pretty good job. They have so many different areas that they're writing about. So you're taking people that have a business interest or education interest, or there's lots of different people interested in what they have to write. So they're a pretty good one to bring everybody together from different backgrounds. I think that's a good place to start.
Thinking about where, like location and place, like where should people that want to listen, where should they be going?
You know, I think so. One of the ingredients, I think that's no, you're fine. I think one of the ingredients that's really important, and we talk about listening, is identity, right? So place and identity, I think, are interconnected. It's hard for people in a place to show up and listen or feel like they can be heard if they don't have an identity, right? They don't feel like their place has an identity. So now we're talking about sense of belonging. If people don't feel like they belong, then it's, from a social standpoint, it's really hard to talk about anything that, you know, open up about your experiences or hear someone else's experience or talk about things environmentally or things from an economic standpoint. So I think, you know, when we talk to your question about place, I think identifying where are the places that have identity, right? And how do the people in those places, how is that defined by them? And then when you go into those places, have conversations that are themed and dynamic around those identities, right? How they define their place. Because now they feel like they belong, they feel like they have a voice, because by how they define their place, that conversation is meeting them where they are by that definition. Does that make sense?
So I hear you saying things that sound like comfort, trust, like meeting people where they are. So you're meeting people where they feel like they already have a solid foundation and they're in a place that they feel strong, and they feel like they have a voice and maybe have some power.
And if not,
a better word, and then you can build on top.
And build on top. And then I think not. Another thing to do is, so I'm going to say yes and. Places that don't have an identity, or they're wanting to develop or create an identity, right? Having a process, having space for helping those places create their identity and their sense of belonging, because then that work can happen first, and then, you know, from a process standpoint, then they get into having these very specific dynamic conversations where they feel like they can be listened and heard to. But there are a lot of places that are in Fort Worth that seem to not have an identity, seem to not have, felt a sense of belonging. And maybe that's, you know, where we see some of the arts and humanities space not being at the table enough, because it's like, where do they feel like they belong, right? In these different conversations in place.
But it should be with decision makers, people that actually, because I can listen, but if I don't make any decisions, what good is the information that I have?
And I think there's a priority on communication being a requirement, transparency being a requirement. So I'm coming from the Title I perspective. Communication is a requirement. I don't get to choose whether or not I include my parents in on how we spend our federal funds. So I think when it comes to listening, there's a priority on making communication and transparency a requirement for all organizations.
As I hear you, and I'm checking to see if I'm listening, who are we listening to? Is that what I heard you say? Because you're working with children, but are you listening to the parents?
Right.
Are we addressing their needs?
Right. Yes. but well, I wanted to look at it from the other side.
Okay.
Not just the listener, but the communicator. Are we giving the listener an opportunity? Are we being the listener, and are we giving the communicator, the listener, an opportunity to communicate? Is it a two-way? And I can't listen if I don't make a priority of communicating.
They have role things that you can't just like literally talk to them.
And then I wonder what that's like for a parent that's an immigrant that doesn't speak the language or read the language.
It's much harder.
So, the barriers that they have to overcome as well.
Right.
And then there are parents that go out and they speak at these words, but they get trained to do that. And then yet the parents that represent the body of the children that we're serving are not being represented. Making sure to collect qualitative data, not just quantitative data, because qualitative data, you're collecting the voices from the parents, the teachers, the children, and the community leaders, versus quantitative data, you are collecting data that only certain people can evaluate and implement and analyze. And so making sure that we are picking up the voices for the stakeholders involved. And then we talked about creating workshops to help adults like parents or community leaders advocate for students, like at board meetings, etc. And we talked about sometimes we create workshops and events and sessions, but oftentimes the parents or certain parents don't come. So how do we get them to come to the community like school and make sure that they feel a part of it? So we talked about using the arts as a vehicle and using festivals and activities where kids are performing or kids are doing something, and that the parents feel like they're proud of it and they want to come out and be part of it as well. And once they're there, really start developing that relationship so that we can provide them with the resources that they need to advocate for their children. I think creating the healthy space where they have a voice and they have a say, and making sure that they are having the opportunities to learn at their style, at their time, where they're at, and be creative and curious, because that's like the two keys that they need to continue their journeys in life, not just educational, but in general, becoming lifetime learners as well.
From my perspective, I see that people have lost the intention for stuff. Why do we elect these people to go sit in these places that says we represent? Well, if all I ever hear are your thoughts coming out, and I never hear repeated anything that I've said to you or heard said to you in some other kind of a listening session, a town hall meeting, for instance, school board meeting, if you will. It's not about how much you have to say. It's about how much can you hear and take in and process.
Yeah, it's like being vulnerable and putting yourself out there and putting yourself in situations where those conversations are more likely to happen. And I'm an extroverted introvert, so that's hard for me. And so it's like sometimes it's just pairing up with someone, and I don't know, it makes it easier when it's not just one-on-one sometimes. But yeah, I think it's creating those opportunities, like you said.
I like that. I think that takes also some research and getting to places where outside of maybe even where we work, or just our natural social circles, and going to events like maybe this that are not necessarily something that you do on a day-to-day basis, but you do get to leave with meeting some people who are outside of your circle in all sorts of ways, and putting yourself in places that you're with people who are not like you.
Curious about that. It's probably one of your questions. Outside of things like, yes, obviously this is going to be for hand raisers and those that are interested in, having some sort of change, being a change agent on that. But how do you engage someone that's not open to that? So if you're talking about, you want to talk about the whole audience. If it's, for example, for Rogue Water, if you're talking to someone might be on the opposite side of things, how do you get them to realize that it's a public conversation?
Solutions and how we can generate solutions in our community. So I just want to start by asking, where do we need to be listening about housing in our communities? Where do those conversations physically need to take place to get sort of more voices involved? And anybody can jump in.
One area, of course, is with codes. But in addition to that, what Johnny was saying is correct. Channel 8 last year did a series on no banks below.
It's called Below 30.
Below 30. And if people think that's not also happening in every other major community, then they're just not listening. They're not saying. Redlining.
That's what, if you look at the red line districts, you know, where they were, those are the exact communities that are still not being invested to this day. And so even though the red, highlighting is gone, it's still a red line district.
By the way, if y'all have never actually seen the Fort Worth map, I've got a link to it. I'll be glad to send that to you.
You overlay it on today and it's like, oh, this is why.
The other issue, 40%, and I may have my percentage wrong, of housing is now being sold to large corporations.
That's right.
Raises the prices of the housing. They don't care about the neighborhoods. They just want to turn the dollar. They have no investment in the people of the neighborhood. An example is we now have I live on the west side in Ridgely. We've been there for 48 years, my husband and family. We now have 2 homes in the neighborhood on our street that are Airbnbs or Vivos or whatever you call them. Short-term rentals. So we have been looking at how do we change the codes on that, and I know the city is working on that. But
They're still illegal.
They're illegal, but they happen.
And the number of the changing and how many people and how the living situation was there. And this was Christmas time, so I'm talking about a few weeks ago. I was horrified by just how many people were there and what their situation was. And I console them. I don't get out and talk to them and say it's dangerous, like a friend. You know, I wonder about the situation there. You know, you're talking about drug abuse, sexual assault, and this kind of thing. And I don't think we're doing anything. Certainly not enough anymore. And so I have to believe that if somebody is not listening, because if somebody was listening, we wouldn't have that.
You see what about it? I feel like so many of the issues, whatever it is, whether it's hunger, housing, or drug abuse, it's all so layered, and it's really, really hard to even begin to address some of these things. And I think especially our city leaders are probably well aware of Lancaster, but we know about it too. We drive through there.
I want them not to be homeless. That's what I care about, right? And I appreciate that. But I think let's go into economic development.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I have wanted to speak about that. We have an opportunity to bring our backyard, our youth, our minorities, the worst areas of Fort Worth, and I can show them in 4 months a program that right now they can go online for free and go into training. And right now the cloud practitioner opened up. It's a very entry-level position. You know what the starting salary is after 4 months of getting their certification? After you get certification in 4 months, you know what the starting salary is? $88,000. Did we just build our backyard? We just became economic, right? What's the average salary in Fort Worth? Starting salary? $31K. $32K. That's our average. So we have an opportunity for economics. But we have to build that theory into Fort Worth economic development because they don't have it in their brain. They don't have it in their structure. It's like talking to a banker about a new concept. All he does is goes to computers like, I don't see it here. We have to get that into that chart.
I think that's another interesting question is like, how does employment relate to economic development? Are they one and the same, or are there two sides?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have to be the same. We have to be the same. I do not want people to sit there in a job at 31 or 32 and that they stalemate and they hit a plateau. We need escalating job performance. We need to be escalating. We need computer science, guys. You can go on forever, and the opportunity for computer science, but the opportunity is also for welders. If you're a good welder, let me tell you something. I know plenty of welders that have not graduated, they don't even have a GED. But I'm gonna tell you, ever seen what a good bead looks like? A bead of weld? It looks like it's together. It looks like two pieces of metal look like one. That's a good bead, right? So we can build those programs in our backyard again, because those are entry-level positioning. We just got to build it correctly.
And that's a problem, is that there are conversations that people want to avoid. And I don't know how we overcome that.
I don't know either.
Because you can drag them in. I mean, there's some kind of initiative now that's going on. It's called the Tarrant County Unity Council. I think it started out at Tarrant County Public Health. So they have all these Zoom meetings and virtual meetings that they had during the pandemic, talking about all these issues of social justice and race and equity. And it's the proverbial the choir singing to the choir. Everybody who's in those little rooms are people, mainly people of color, people who are impacted by those, the ones who are in the systems that have the resources to make change don't come. They don't hear them.
That's the table they need to invite back.
Exactly.
You know, I think also, just in addition to that, one thing I believe elected officials have, I think the position elected officials have, that maybe practitioners don't, is they have the power to convene. Like they'll hear, the mayor or whatever they call a meeting, they can get people there. Right? And sometimes it's just getting people in the room. Because if I call it a superintendent, then, if I'm, it may be seen as me doing what elected officials call it. It helps.
And I've been at enough tables to know that there are very, very few quiet voices in this room. So we're going to do a sampling of tables, and I just want you to stand up so you can be seen, not on the tables, just stand up. Say your name and the topic at your table, and one comment from you that most resonates with you at this moment. If you had to say one thing in this room, and I might start with table one. I'm going to start with table one, and then we're going to just kind of hop around the room. But be ready. Your voice is so very important, and the one of many things that I regret is not being able to pull up a chair and sit down at the table, because once I listen in, you had me. I wanted to hear more. So give us a sampling. I'll start with table one, and then who knows where we'll go. But and I'll do it the democratic way. So raise your hand and stand up if you want to speak. Your name, the topic, and something you feel is important.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Swan. Here at the education table, I think the biggest headline that we came up with at the very end was leaders should understand parents, teachers, and students better. We couldn't come up with solutions in 30 minutes, y'all, but that's our big headline. Just one?
Go ahead.
Okay. A few other points that we made.
One more point.
Okay, one more. I think we'll end it with a positive. I think the last one we said was we should celebrate education successes more. I think we hear a lot about negatives and teacher waves leaving and student performance scores. I think as a former teacher, there definitely needs to be more celebration and successes. So
we need to meet people where they are whenever we're planning whatever it is that we're planning. And then being willing to listen, willing to talk, and understanding power dynamics whenever we do go to these communities.
My name is Stephanie Corso. I
I'm with Road Water. I guess some of the biggest takeaways for us is that communication is really, I mean, it's at the center of everything, but for this topic specifically, of having people who can translate the technical that we all need to understand from subject matter experts that we can trust, but in a way that we can understand and know how to make decisions based on that. And that we really need to do a better job at communicating the shared responsibility that every single one of us, yes, every single one of y'all in this room have to the environment and the impact on that. And that there's not someone out there who's gonna magically fix this for us, that it's a shared responsibility. And I have to say that I've worked in water for 15 years, and these folks right here from Fidelity Investments that shared about people who are investing in green solutions and sustainable solutions. And it's a pretty depressing time to be in my line of work right now, so I really needed that, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
And our headline for general listening was, listen intentionally and then advocate for those most affected by the issues. We had a reporter here who helped us. And then our headline for the topic, listening, advocacy, and action for and with people struggling with mental health.
We have to be intentional about making every voice be heard, and not only talking about ideas, but actually execute them and hold the people in charge accountable.
And my name is Merville Johnson. Our table was about race and equity. Intentional was a big word that we use quite often, and we also talked about the need to respect the value of others in order to invite them to the table. And once that you respect the value and have relationships, then you can impact change.
Our topic, as he mentioned, was transportation, and in the 30 minutes we had, we did solve all of the transportation Our headline, let me bring it closer because I didn't bring my glasses in with me, but our headline is a constant struggle to take transportation into the modern West, a story of the haves and have-nots. So, you know, there was a lot of discussion about varying needs in the community, and a lot of discussion about how we can ensure adequate funding for transportation and encourage people to get involved in public transportation, so, as you mentioned, so that everyone is heard, but also to keep in mind that public transportation includes not only trains and buses, but bicycles, walkable neighborhoods, and so forth. So that was really our discussion. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Brianna Wasinski, and we had employment and economic development, and so we have a very long headline to encompass that conversation. But ultimately, we need to flip the script on economic development to focus on building the backyard on small businesses in our city as a catalyst for greater service to our community.
Okay, so ours is on education, and we talked about the importance of the system of listening, so making sure that we're collecting qualitative data, not just quantitative, because when we're looking at quantitative data, only certain people can analyze and execute, but when you're collecting qualitative data, then you're including everyone from teachers to parents and students. And then we talked about who comes to the table and who gets to discuss and advocate. So doing workshops to teach parents and community leaders how to advocate, and how do we bring them to our schools, because oftentimes we're like, yeah, but they don't come. We build it, but they don't come. Well, how do we build it around their culture, through activities, through arts and culture? Because when you're including their kids and they're performing or they're doing something, then the community feels that they're being called, and that they start having ownership of their buildings and their community, and they still have the voice to be able to advocate whenever the programs start to disappear. Then they're involved and they're aware, and they start becoming the voice.
Our topic was housing. We see it as a multifaceted issue where the less affluent residents should be at the forefront. Banks and officials who stand in the way should also consider that transportation goes hand in hand with access to affordable housing, and affordable housing needs a sexier name.
I walked around the room and listened a lot to some things that I think we also want to hear about. You know, one of the tables, I believe it was table 4 on housing, that sometimes there's silencing that's going on in our community. When people do bring things up, then things get silenced. So we want to make sure we're attending to listening to those voices and not trying to quiet the stuff that makes us uncomfortable or that's hard. That's the stuff we really probably want to pay most attention to. Table 6 and sustainability talked about how important place and identity are and how they're interrelated. So where we're from, that sense of belonging, those were some really beautiful sentiments from your table. I'm thankful to be able to partner with the Fort Worth Report because there are reporters and staff members throughout the room, and they'll be following up on these issues. They actually have a reporter who's an accountability reporter, right? That's part of the thing is, how do you prove that you have been listening? And one of the biggest proofs of listening is that you have changed. Your organization, whether you're the city of Fort Worth or the school district or any number of the wonderful organizations that are represented in this room, you have to lay down power and control, and you have to be ready to change. And that's the real test of listening, is change. And so that's where I'll leave my final comments.
That power is a significant factor in our perception of listening, who gets listened to and who's hearing, and what happens, right? What happens after the listening is the most powerful factor in the room. And so what they lifted up are there are plenty of tried and true processes like power mapping. And then once the power map reveals who's at the bottom, flip that, make it a circle instead of a hierarchy, right? So that those in least power get heard and acted on. And then the other piece had to do with, we all know about the squeaky wheel, right? Who gets listened to? The squeaky wheel. Table 13 added an important factor to that. It's often the squeaky wheel that has the buy-in from the power structure that gets heard. You can squeak all day long and it's not likely to go anywhere. But that alignment, so to be mindful of that so that we change those dynamics. And then last but not least, I think, when we're talking about listening that leads to action, where you hold listening sessions, when you hold listening sessions, and the design, all of that matters. Because that determines who shows up and whether or not they feel like that's a place they belong and their voice belongs. We have a lot of spaces that we invite people, we just don't want them to say anything.
Usually when we're invited to a meeting for an event or for an organization, we're asked questions based on what they need to know from us. We think it's really important to have agenda-free meetings where, at least sometimes, where we are listening to ideas and topics that we should be taking care of that we're not. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to model what a listening session without really an agenda looks like and how it can help you generate great ideas and also solutions for the community at large. I hope the impact is like kind of a heart change, right? So people realize that they do have to lay down the easy way, or they do have to lay down their preconceived ideas of how things should be solved and actually invest in listening and hearing maybe some hard things, but also getting excited about truly knowing what they need to do to make the community better and finding those solutions from other people instead of from within the system. Yeah, I know the Fort Worth community and the leaders are interested. A lot of those folks are in the room with us today, so that makes me super happy. A lot of their communicators were in the room and some of the other leaders and some former leaders of the city, so they care about it. You can see that they do. We know that there's been a history of some listening and some not listening, so how do we get more consistent and make it just part of our culture? And I think that's exciting.